Okay, so let's maybe start with a recap of where we were last week. So 3 main points from last week's discussion that I want to make sure we capture. Parables are clever, crafty, transformative. That's the primary. They're memorable and subversive. One key figure that you might want to remember is revealing and concealing. So there's intention behind that. They're meant to reveal to some people, he who has ears, let him hear. And then they're also meant to be concealing. Why are they meant to be concealing? Several ideas. It's not necessarily an either or, but judicial hardening is one concept that's true in Isaiah, which is where some of this revealing and concealing language comes from, the parables in Isaiah. Exile and remnant hope. This is a common idea, particularly in rabbinic thought, for use of parables. It's pedagogical. So Origen leans in on this is a teaching moment and it's important. It's also the New Testament parables themselves really present themselves as pedagogical, and so that might be the meaning why it's revealing and concealing. And then one that's really common for Christians and the New Testament is that it's a fulfillment, it's a prophecy, it's messianic signaling, essentially. So second thing I want to make sure everybody is clear on is that the parables are central. So if you don't hear anything else, hear this. The parables are abundant in the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Scholars estimate anywhere between 30 and 45%. There are arguments about what constitutes a parable and what doesn't, but it's anywhere between 30 and 45% of all of Jesus' teachings are in parabolic form. There are 40 plus parables. Again, some arguments about exactly how many there are. And then that comes across 3 different gospel writers. And then the last thing, the one that really drew me when I was studying the parables, was the ways to read them. Social location is really, really important. We saw that last week when we were doing the story of what we in America refer to as the prodigal son. And just as a quick reminder, people in the United States all said the reason he was in the pit pen is because he was spendthrift with his parents' money. And then they went to Russia, and the Russians said about 75% of the time, the reason he was in the pig pen was because there was a famine in the land, not because he was spendthrift with his parents' money. And then they went to Tanzania, did the exact same exercise. The reason he was in the pig pen was because no one would help him, not because there was a famine in the land, and not because he was spendthrift with his parents' money. All 3 are in the gospel. All 3 are in that parable. In order to hear that well, we need diversity of opinion and diversity of thought, and we need to understand our social location. And then last, reading the co-text. So
social location means the lens that we see it through.
Yeah, that's right. Your own social location. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama.
The parable location. It's our.
That's right. Yeah. So as we're reading, I'm concerned about my 401k. I think about my investments way more than the average person in some countries. And that influences the way I see things. I've read the parable of the prodigal son 100 times, and I've never noticed there was a famine in the land, and I've never noticed that no one would help him. But when we do this in concert with other people, we can see those things come to life. They help us.
Can you just add something there? When you're saying social contact, social location, it should be at least a self-awareness that I have a worldview that I'm approaching this parable with.
Right.
And I need to be open to listening to somebody else's worldview in a parable, so to speak. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. The exercise that Dave ran us through last week was he physically read the parable out loud, and then we shut the book, our phones, and you guys recited for me what happened in the parable. The text is there. There was a famine. No one would help him. We all missed it, every one of us, when we were giving a synopsis of what happened. The Africans would not have missed one portion of it. The Russians did not miss another portion of it.
But we know what prodigal means.
And prodigal, we learned, means spendthrift or wasteful. And that's a header that we gave that parable. It's not native to the text itself. And within the context, looking at the text around the story of the prodigal son, there's lost sheep, lost coin, and then what we refer to as the prodigal. And then there's a shrewd manager that comes immediately after it. When you look at those texts that surround it, is that the best name of that parable? Would it be better named something else? So that's just a recap of what we talked about last week.
You know, it's really hard to see things, to realize that yours is not the right interpretation. People typically don't have that perspective that, oh, someone else might see this differently. Like yours is the right one in your mind.
Yeah. What a great segue.
You primed me, you paid me for that.
So let's talk about when Jesus clarifies parables. He sometimes will give you a little bit of context. There are only 3 where he explicitly states, this is what this means. So frustrating because there are more than 40 of these, and there's only 3 in which he says, this is this. Okay, so first one is what we refer to as the meta parable. It's a parable about why he teaches in parables. So if you've seen that movie Inception, it's kind of like, this is what's going on here. Okay, so it's a path, a rocky ground, among thorns, and good soil. So there, in this parable, there is a sower, who he says is God, throwing seed, which is good news, on path, on rocky ground, among thorns, and on good soil. When the seed falls on the paths, it's eaten up by the birds. And what that represents, according to Jesus in the parables, is those who are unwilling to receive the word. And in one of these, it's hearts. So in one of these gospels, it's a heart. So that allows evil to come in and snatch it away. Rocky ground, it's seeds that sprout up really quickly, but they wither when there's a trial or when there's a persecution. And so that symbolizes those who initially accept the word but lack the depth. And then importantly, this word fall, they fall away. A lot of people, not just scholars, but a lot of scholars say that this nods to Peter, which is an interesting idea. Peter is a name in Greek that means rock, little rock, essentially. It's not his given name, but it is a name that he's given by Jesus. And so, interestingly enough, this idea of the falling away, it's referenced in Peter's denial when Jesus says, you're going to fall away. And it only happens in Matthew and Mark. The falling away in the parable that happens here also only happens in Matthew and Mark. So Luke doesn't reference the falling away, nor does he reference Peter falling away in the denial process.
But Peter came back.
Well, yes, of course. But just an interesting idea about how that could sort of insinuate that this might be a nod to some sort of a Petrine personality or characteristic.
You got to define that term.
Petrine? Peter.
Peter.
Sorry. Okay, among thorns. So these seeds grow and they're choked up by competing thorns. And to Jesus, what that illustrates is those who are distracted by riches, worldly worries, desires, and that prevents them from bearing fruit. And then the very last one is we have good soil. And what Jesus describes this as is someone who hears, understands, accepts, and begins to participate in that lasting kingdom. Okay, so that is the meta parable. It's one of only 3 where Jesus gives exactly what he means when he.
Is there thoughts why he selectively only gave interpretations on certain ones? Like, maybe this is so important, I need to make sure you fully understand what I'm getting at?
You asked this last week. You said you're going to give me all the answers to the parables. I'm like, we've only got 3. We've only got 3. Yeah, it's frustrating for a lot of people, but I think we can go back to this idea that the intention is to be subversive and memorable, to reveal and conceal. It's still resonating. Last week we had that infinity symbol of you're invited to participate in the experience. You're thinking and reflecting on it. You're participating in your everyday lives, like throwing out seeds or making some dough or whatever. And all of a sudden, one of these parables comes to your mind. I've had one of those happen to me recently. I just helped some people out of debt, and I was thinking about the parable of the 2 debtors, one that owed 500 and one that owed 50. The one that owed 500 and the debt was forgiven was so much more thankful. It came to me yesterday as I was helping someone get out of a debt situation.
I was thinking 2 possibilities. One is that I need you to really understand what I'm saying here in this parable.
Yeah.
I'm going to be explicit.
Yeah.
The other possibility is I'm going to show you maybe how to understand parables by giving you the meaning on these select few.
Yeah.
So that just comes to mind. I was just wondering, at all you're looking into this, has anybody come up with a very
Well, really and truly, it's the Lucan one. It's the Matthean one that gives you a few more. The meta parable, the explanation is in all 3. The only other ones where we get the full explanation is just in Matthew 13. That's it. It's the only time we ever get it. And so, he gives us an example of what each of these represents. And then he tells a little bit more detail about it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time thinking through it unless you want to, but I did want you to see this. The one who sowed is the Son of Man. Field is the world. So it's very allegorical. Each symbol represents something. And then he gives a brief explanation of what each symbol represents. Okay to move on, or do we?
But maybe it's because that was a quick and succinct parable, and you needed to give it more explanation. I reread through, I wasn't here last week, apologize, but rereading through, the son that squandered the money and came back. It's a lot of explanation about he spent the money, he was a spendthrift on women of ill repute, since we have a child here, and other, endeavors. And then there really are throwaway lines. There was a famine, and what was the other one?
Famine, and no one would help him.
No one would help. Yeah, no one would help.
Yeah.
Those are both. That's it. There's no explanation within those. So, I think it's almost interesting that the throwaway lines are what the 2 other civilizations, if you want to put it that way, focused on. And I think here he's wanting to make sure you don't miss it, because in my view, the first parable, they miss it if they don't see that it's about that he, his father still loves him even though he's screwed up.
Yeah.
It's not about a famine. It's not about nobody helping him. It's really about he's really screwed up and he's being helped. Or am I wrong in that?
Well, I don't think it's wrong to think of it in terms of the influence that money had within the culture and the lack of inheritance, the ill repute behavior. No, that's not wrong. It doesn't encapsulate every word that Jesus said. And I don't know if I would think of it as throwaway. Like, I don't think anything comes out of his mouth as throwaway. So, sure. It doesn't provide the same level of explanation. But there are so many parables that are just one line, no explanation. It's like, okay, this is really simple, but man.
But is it any wonder that our society would focus in on money when we are told money is rich?
I know. Yeah.
But it really, I guess my thing is the product is an accurate description, because it really is 90% of what that story is about. I don't know. I just, maybe I should have been here for the first Sunday and I would have not had to.
Well, I want to make sure we can get to some of these later slides. So as I mentioned previously, there are some examples where he gives you a little bit of context. Luke is frequently referencing sort of context, like Jesus said this parable because they were doing this and he knew that this was coming. He does that occasionally, and then every now and again he'll give you like what one of those things represents, but not all of them. So that's a common tactic. I want us to talk about the Good Samaritan. Anybody by chance want to read it? Luke 10, 25, 37.
I'm in Luke, I can do it.
Okay. 10.
10.
25 through 37.
Luther's taking a lot of scroll there. And the lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said to him, What is written in the law? How does it read to you? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly, and to do this you will live. But wishing to justify himself, he said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied and said, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among the robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance a priest was going down the road when he saw him and passed by on his other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by near. But a Samaritan, who was on a journey, came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. He came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them, and he put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Was that as far as we know?
37.
On the next day, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, and I will return, and I will repay you. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, The one who showed mercy toward him. Jesus said, Go and do the same.
Okay. So in the 3 parables that Jesus gave us explanations, full explanations, he had a symbol and he said what that symbol meant. And then afterwards he would give a little bit of a midrash. He would provide some context for what he was talking about. So I want to show you what happened through the first several, like let's say 13, 14 centuries of Christian thought on one slide. Sorry, it's a lot, but I just picked a couple. I know. I picked just a couple of people out. So Clement, Origen, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and then Martin Luther. I'm just going to focus on Augustine because he captures it. He captures what I really want to relay. What he says is, okay, so the wounded man is Adam. Jerusalem is Eden, the heavenly city of peace. He doesn't say Eden, but he says heavenly city of peace. Jericho is the moon. And what that signifies is human mortality.
Did you say the moon?
The moon. That's right. Human mortality. Augustine then goes on to say, robbers are the devil and his angels. The priests and Levites are the Old Testament priesthood. The Samaritan is the guardian. It's also Jesus. Oil is comfort of good hope. Bandages are restraint of sin. Wine is the exhortation to work with fervent spirit. The beast is once again also Jesus. It's Christ incarnate. It's his incarnate body. The inn where he goes is the church, and the innkeeper is Paul. It is interesting.
That's why he should give us more in Jesus.
Yeah. I actually like the allegorical approach. Like, hey, let me try to unpack this the way Jesus did. Let me try to associate one image with one thing. Let me not try to read this so literally, and let me come up with some ideas. For people throughout a lot of church history, this approach was really helpful and really meaningful. You can get a little off, I think. Most of us would probably agree, maybe not the best symbols and what they represent. But you see what he's doing is he's working hard, especially at the beginning, to associate this with the Genesis narrative. There's Adam, there's Eden, there's this fall, there's human mortality, etc. All wrapped up in the priests and Levites, the Old Testament, a priesthood, etc. Then comes along Jesus, that guardian, who resolves the situation. So this is the approach through much of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, down into the 16th century. Martin Luther changes it up just a bit. So does Thomas Aquinas. You see there are fewer allegorical symbols. They try to simplify some of that. But a lot of people are sticking to the same idea. The wounded man is the sinner who's rescued by grace, or you might also say Adam. The Samaritan is, of course, Christ. The oil and wine is the gospel healing, and the inn is the church. That's true for a lot of people throughout much of church history. And this was how it was taught for centuries.
You know, it kind of goes back to what you said, that all the stuff you're talking about me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in one sense, I really enjoy this approach, and you can tell the heart is in the right place because they're trying to model what Jesus has already done. In some of these other parables, he did give explicit allegorical symbol and what the focus should be, what the target would be.
Also, I never heard any of that. Have you been exposed to? I mean,
No.
yeah. I mean,
Really interesting way to read it.
right? Well, yeah, because it's not a footnote. The bulk of Christian history, I mean, Augustine, he wasn't a minor figure, right?
Right.
Right. Wasn't he like a enlightened? Maybe I don't know. I hear people read him today and they're like, he's too far out for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, he wasn't the only one, because I mean, a lot of, like you said, the bulk of.
Clement's the first one to really do it, and he sticks pretty closely with what Augustine has. I mean, Augustine may have borrowed from Clement or Origen. The first one I found, I don't know who was first. The first one I found was Clement of Alexandria.
Predated Augustine.
Yeah, he's second century. And then comes Origen. And these people did not live in similar areas. They were far apart. And so
Know of each other?
Augustine certainly knew of Origen and Clement's writings, and sometimes he references them. Did he know of this particular one? I don't know. I would think probably, but I'm not certain. But anyway, this is how it was done throughout much of church history. Okay, then what comes along after that? We've got a Reformation period where it's Luther who did some of that allegorical work, and then also people like Calvin and others. There are lots of others, but we have a tendency to wrap up Reformation history in thinking of those two. They wanted to lean on more literal interpretations of the text and try to get back to the textual surface. In the 1600s, I see some eye raises. In the 1600s, an early modern period, there was a guy, Spinoza, who became known for really looking at the historical critical approach, which is a more modern approach that we have to study in seminaries today. And that sort of started in the 1600s, a very nascent idea. Enlightenment period comes along, and it gets even more academic. A lot of history, a lot of culture. In the 1800s, the source criticism process begins, and what you'll see is more famous people that I had to study, like Julius Wellhausen, who really focuses in on sources of Hebrew texts and where those sources might have originated. A lot of archaeological work done there, textual variations, that kind of stuff. That's for really smart people that I don't really belong in that category. And then Adolf Jülicher. Jülicher devoted a lot of his study specifically to the parables. And he took a very different approach than much of church history. So Jülicher's idea was it's a revolution. And what he essentially said is there is only one single point in a parable, the end. There aren't multiple ways of thinking about it. There's just this one. And here's 3,000 pages of research for why that's true. And so what he uses that 3,000 pages of research to conclude on the parable of the Good Samaritan is that you need to be a good neighbor, and that's it. So there you go. That's his approach. And his work was foundational for a lot of modern scholarship. But things do morph and change over time. I want to expose you guys to some other more modern academic methods for New Testament interpretation. We went through some the other day. Social location, where you're from can dictate the words that you see on the page. That you just read 5 minutes ago, you shut it, you missed words that were on that page. Your social location influences that. Co-textual analysis, what surrounds this within the book itself. So in the Lucan account, lost, prodigal, shrewd manager who lost his job. Is it appropriate to think of this in terms of lostness? So that's up for debate, but that's a co-textual approach. There's also textual analysis, intertextual analysis, historical and cultural context, and reception and theological contexts. So some of this includes things like church traditions. So we kind of covered a bit of that a minute ago when we were looking at here's how people in church history have sort of done this in the past. What can we glean? What's helpful? What's not helpful? So that's the theological and reception processes. And then reputation, which ones are famous? I will say Augustine's is the most famous. That's why I picked it, because it was the most thorough and comprehensive. So within church history, he's the most famous, or some would say the most infamous. And so I think that's important to sort of study and think through.
The guy you just mentioned, that said, it's one thing.
Ulricher,
Ulricher?
Adolf. Just stick with Adolf.
I like him because he's basically saying kiss. Keep it simple. And again, kid the presence on that. I won't say the stupid. Because Jesus did before that parable, he said, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
I think where I land on it right now is Augustine's is pretty extreme, but I love the heart behind it because that's what Jesus did. He was trying to model Jesus's 3 examples that he gave us. And I love that he leaned in there and tried to come up with this really unique way of thinking about it. Greg has told me often, you're thinking too literally. Like you're reading this a little too literally. And it's a good reminder for me to say, okay, let me try to adopt some of this Augustine approach. Clement, Origen, these famous church fathers. But that's an extreme. It's famous because it's very extreme. Adolf Ulricher's approach is also very extreme. And maybe we can find somewhere in the middle where some of these other approaches might help us. Again, the social location, the co-text, do any of these also help us get to the heart of what Jesus was trying to relay? Maybe.
Don't you think they're real important, though, that you get the points that you carry around with you? Just like your example at the beginning that you were thinking about the family that you helped.
Yeah.
Of what kind of people we are. Or
Yeah.
What kind of people. It builds the character.
Yeah.
For you to know those things quickly, kind of the thing that you're trying to emulate.
Yeah.
So getting the main point high level.
Yeah. It's huge.
It's huge.
But while it's huge and important, there's so much risk in indirect communication. Like, Jesus intentionally was indirect in 45% of his teachings. Like, why was he so indirect? And
Direct gets you killed. And even a indirect eventually.
and that is one of the ideas. Like, this is something intentionally indirect. But even with when he's just with his disciples.
David Brooks, in his book, you know, he grew up Jewish. He said, growing up that way, he always heard, you know, going through Egypt, you know, his people went through Egypt and was led out of Egypt and stuff. But he said those stories are just so, they don't know if, they never even thought they were true growing up necessarily if they went down to Egypt. But they were all burned into the Jewish people. That
Yeah.
You go through a striving in life and you build yourself back up. But it just is what makes Jewish people is learning those things. And these parables are the same way, the way I see them.
Yeah. Well, there's a long history of parables. We talked about it just briefly last week. The mashal tradition in the Hebrew text, a lot of parables. The most famous one is Nathan and David, where Nathan has to find some subversive way to tell David that he's been found out and that God knows that he has done these terrible things to Uriah and Uriah's wife. And so he says, there was a man and he had all the riches, and then there was this one poor man and all he had was a sheep, and when there was a traveler that came in, the rich man took that sheep and killed it and fed it to the guy, and David's furious. And that's when Nathan's like, gotcha. The whole thing's about you. So there's a long...
I want the world to be black and white. And I think part of it Jesus was showing is it's gray. You know, the law says walk around the Samaritan, you know, or walk around the... I guess they were in Samaria, so the injured person was a Samaritan also. I don't remember the context.
It doesn't say. It was just a traveler on the road.
But it's, you know, the world is gray, but we want it black and white.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And probably all things that there are, things that are both physical, metaphysical, the more profound the thought, the less tangible it will be.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about last week is...
Speak up, I can't hear you over the drum.
I know. And I think it was Ron. We mentioned, help me remember who it was, but we sort of mentioned that in one sense, everything is kind of parabolic. Everything's a parable in a strange way. They're stories that are in our DNA. They sort of tell us who we are. But there is risk in misunderstanding, especially, a lot of people would say, the warning parables. Those warning parables, there's real risk in misunderstanding what Jesus meant, and getting to the heart of what he meant that's what we're doing. That's
the worldly way of
yeah,
understanding.
yeah. The whole point is really to honor Jesus's words. This is the word. Okay.
What do you think? I know you got to go down the line.
No, it's fine.
Slow you down, but
No, it's fine.
You're just being too good, and we all want to.
Yeah, right.
And I do think that what we should be doing is looking at the nature of Christ, and love is what his main message is. Then our interpretation of these parables, if it's contrary to that, then we're going down the wrong road or wrong path
Yeah.
of understanding the meaning behind it.
Well said. Well said. Okay, so textual insights, just so y'all are thinking along the same lines. We're sticking with the Good Samaritan here. Structure and theme. So when you're doing textual analysis, like what is this? Is this poetry? Is this something else? Is this allegorical? Is this supposed to be an ethical teaching? What's the intent behind it? And so it's framed by legal dialogue. This is a lawyer having a conversation, and that's what's framing this parable. There's a shift from who is my neighbor to who became a neighbor. the form of it is an ethical example. It's not a kingdom allegory like a lot of Jesus's parables. The kingdom is like. And the function of it is, according to a lot of people, prophetic inversion.
So would you explain became a neighbor?
Oh, which one was my neighbor? He asked at the beginning, who is my neighbor?
There's people around you that you already consider your neighbor.
Uh-huh.
But are you saying, so who would become?
So the idea of, who is my neighbor to become my neighbor is really trying to stick to Jesus's broader question of which one of these was the neighbor, then you go and do likewise. So who gets to become your neighbor in light of what I've just spoken to you? Yeah. So grammar and translation, I'm not going to make y'all do Greek, I promise. But one of the things he says is wishing to justify himself. What that means, it's essentially self-vindication. It's not legal righteousness. It's really trying to make himself feel better. In essence, that's the core of what that phrase is getting to in the Greek. So that's something worthy of discussion, I think. There's this idea that the Samaritan had compassion. This is used for divine mercy in all the rest of Luke. That phrase is only in reference to divine mercy. And so there's something divine that's happening in this moment with the Samaritan. And then go and do likewise. That is that's a command form of that verb. And what it's suggesting is that this needs to be a continual thing. Don't do this once. This needs to be a continual aspect of your life. Go and do likewise forever, essentially. There's some word studies here. Neighbor. So that's a refined word that can include enemy and outcast, to your point. Mercy. There's a real hinge in Luke, all of Luke's gospel around mercy. He's just so full of mercy throughout the gospel narrative. It's beautiful to witness. But that idea is really important in the Lucan narrative. And then splashenozomai is visceral compassion. It's the same verb that is used of Jesus. Like it's in your gut, essentially. This idea of compassion being like so deeply felt. So that's a word study approach to the textual insights. And then there's a textual criticism. I'm just going to highlight one. Textual criticism looks at all these different variants from all these different places, trash heaps in Egypt where we found sources, Nag Hammadi, Qumran, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. And so there's a manuscript variant, and in that variant it says, "When I return, I will repay you." That's verse 35. And so there's a nuance there to that variant that Origen really leans in on. Origen in particular, so the historical text, he really likes to focus on, "When I return, I will repay you." And then there's also this idea in verse 30 of a certain man, which tries to make it universal in nature. So that is the boring textual stuff. That is one way people try to lean in on interpretation. This is a lot more fun. For me, I think I like this one a lot more. An intertextual approach. So last week, Daryl had a question about what do you mean when you talk about cotext? And I mentioned there's cotext, which is within the same book, within the same framing of a parable, what surrounds it. Intertextual is, are there any hyperlinks? Like if I'm reading this and I click on this, am I going to go to a different website or a different, you get the idea of hyperlinks. Sorry, I'm using parable form. Is there anything in a different book that might help me uncover what this means? And I kind of want us to look at 2 Chronicles 28 for a minute. Anybody want to, oh shoot, it's 12. Okay. 2 Chronicles 28. Anybody want to read just a few verses?
Say it again.
2 Chronicles 28. I think it starts in verse 5, I think.
Wherefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Aram, and they defeated him and carried away from him a great number of captives and brought them to Damascus. He was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who inflicted him with heavy casualties. For Pekah, the son of Maliah, slew in Judah 120,000 in one day, all down in them, because they had forsaken the Lord God of their father. Going?
All right, is you in 2 Chronicles 28?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, were you in verse 1?
Yeah, he was reading 5.
You were starting in verse 5?
Yeah, or 5 through 6.
Okay, keep going.
Kind of went up to one, so just a second. And Zeke, you're giving me all these fun names. Zechariah, a mighty man of Ephraim, slew Messiah, the king's son, and Azrikam, the ruler of the house, and Elkanah, the second to the king. The sons of Israel carried away 200 sons and daughters. The spoils from them and brought them to Samaria, but a prophet of the Lord was there, whose name was Oded. He went on to move Yammer, which is Samaria. Is this what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay. And said to them, Behold, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he has delivered them into your hand, and you have slain them in a rage which was even reached heaven.
So, just for context, the Sumerians have conquered the Judeans, essentially. The Israelite tribes who are part of Samaria have conquered Judah in this moment. Okay, keep going.
Delivered them into your hand, and you have slain them in a rage which was even reached heaven. Now you are proposing to subjugate for yourselves the people of Judah and Jerusalem for male and female slaves. Surely do you not have transgressions of your own against the Lord your God? Now therefore listen to me, and return the captives whom you captured from your brothers, for the burning anger of the Lord is against you.
So go to verse 13 so you don't have to say all those hard words.
13. And said to them, You must not bring the captives in here, for you are proposing to bring upon us guilt against the Lord, adding to our sins and our guilt, for our guilt is great, so that his burning anger is against Israel.
Keep going.
So as the armed men left the captives in the spoil before the officers and all the assembly, then the men who were designated by name arose, took the captives, and they clothed all their naked ones from the spoil, and they gave them the clothes and sandals, fed them, and gave them drink, anointed them with oil, led all their feeble ones on donkeys, and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brothers. Then they returned them to Samaria.
So these are Samaritans who have conquered the Judeans, the people in Jerusalem and Judea. They have now received word that they're not to mistreat them, that they are to clothe them when they're naked, to bandage up their wounds, to put oil on their wounds, to put them on their beast, their animals, their donkey, and to return them back to where they came. So this is a reference to Jericho. Wow. Anybody ever heard that one before? Yeah. And you begin to wonder, intertextually, is this ringing in everybody's ear? Is he doing this on purpose? Who's to say? But I think there's validity to that approach. To look at that intertext and say, there's something going on here. And Jesus wants people to hear about what the Samaritans have done and how maybe they're not so bad after all.
The story I keep hearing is not justice, but grace.
Yeah, mercy. Yeah.
In so many ways, we've taken the Bible to be rules to live by that allows us to draw lines to say who's in, who's out.
Yeah.
And where you've gone with this is, instead of all the rules and the lines that you draw, this is grace to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're at time, but I think, Augustine's approach has a lot of value and a lot of meaning. I think Yulker's approach, the KISS method, has value and meaning.
But for us, just to noodle on it.
Yeah. And there's lots of ways that we can noodle on it. We can noodle on it with a Russian and a Tanzanian. We can noodle on it looking at the text around it, the inner text. If you're really into languages, you can do the textual analysis side. Greg does all of this so well every time he's looking at a text, but with the parables, it's so important for me because it is intended to be revealing and concealing. And I want to be focusing as hard as I can on the revealing aspect of it. Like, let me honor Jesus's memory, his words, as best I can by trying to get to the heart of it. So these are just some approaches to do that. All I'll say is I'm so grateful that I got the chance to do this. I didn't think I was very nervous. And I'm really grateful that y'all listened. And
I saw that it was brilliant, John. And it was why this is brilliant, John. But you know, I love what you're saying here about this intertextual being brilliant. Because you think about it, Jesus can talk to the Pharisees who absolutely know this in what we just read.
Yeah.
And so he didn't quote that scripture for them or go to the scriptures or to the Torah and open it up and read it and say, but yet for the
it's ringing.
farmer,
It's ringing in his ears.
yeah, that may not know that, didn't hear that lately at the temple, he tells a story in common man's language of, love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And so he's hitting them both right between the eyes
Yeah.
with the truth.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well,
You did that to us. So
yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me do it. I'm glad I got to spend a lot of time researching all of this and getting closer. Okay. Yes, I promise.
I'll text you this afternoon.
I promise I'll get them.
Go back when you had said the cross-textual, you referred to the go and do the same. Was there another interpretation of that phrase?
Oh, that's you're talking about,
You had said when they looked at the different findings, the different...
yeah, the textual analysis. Yeah, there's a manuscript variant, and I can find it for you after. I've got my computer with me, and we can look up the different variants. And
There were variants of that.
yeah, that's very common in the scriptures.
Different meanings?
Well, you could say, with this one additional variant, which one is more original than the other? Was this maybe added on somewhere in the transcribing in order to relay something very important to a particular community? I mean, there's all sorts of ideas around this textual criticism. But I'm happy to chat with you about it at lunch because it's lunch now.